Lieutenant Sarah adjusted her flight helmet, the hum of the Black Hawk's engines vibrating through her bones. From her seat in the cockpit, she scanned the rugged Afghan mountains stretching endlessly before her, jagged ridges, narrow valleys, and pockets of shadow where insurgents could strike without warning. Every nerve in her body was alert, trained over years of flying high-risk missions, and living in a world where one mistake could mean death. She had volunteered for this mission, one that would put her directly over a valley where a Navy SEAL team, code-named Iron Dagger, was deep behind enemy lines. Sarah's reputation preceded her. Among pilots and ground troops alike, she was known for precision, calm under fire, and an almost uncanny ability to read chaotic situations. What few knew was the fire that drove her, a quiet, relentless need to prove herself. In the male-dominated world of combat aviation, she had to constantly demonstrate that she belonged, that her instincts, reflexes, and courage were equal to, if not better than, any man. She thought about the lessons her father had drilled into her as a child in Montana, when he had lifted her into the cockpit of a small and whispered, "Always trust the sky, but respect it more than anything else." Those memories contrasted sharply with the tension of the present. She ran her hands over the controls, checking instruments, flares, and weapon systems. Today, she wasn't just flying, she was a lifeline. The SEALs below were in a hostile valley, vulnerable to ambushes, and relying on her for overwatch, air support, and extraction if needed. Her mind ran through the plan, every contingency, every exit route, and every potential enemy position. "Lieutenant, you copy?" crackled the radio. "Loud and clear, command," Sarah replied. Her voice was steady, belying the adrenaline already surging through her veins. She glanced to her co-pilot, Lieutenant James, a young man with quick reflexes but a nervous edge. He met her gaze and she offered a small, reassuring nod. They both knew what was at stake. As they approached the valley, the Black Hawk's shadow fell across the rocky terrain below. Sarah's eyes flicked from her instruments to the ground, searching for the SEAL team's markers, small infrared beacons invisible to the enemy but bright enough to guide her. She had flown countless missions before, but something about this one felt different, heavier, more urgent. She couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this operation would not go according to plan. The mountains themselves seemed to press in, cliffs looming above, deep chasms below. The SEALs' mission had been reconnaissance initially, but reports indicated the insurgents had fortified the area, waiting for any sign of intrusion. Sarah adjusted the throttle, keeping the helicopter steady despite gusts of wind that could toss even the most experienced pilot off course. She reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent in simulators and real combat situations. She could do this. She had to. Lives depended on it. Then, just as she spotted the first telltale signs of the SEAL team below, the world erupted into chaos. The initial ambush was sudden, merciless. RPG fire streaked across the sky, impacting dangerously close to their helicopter. The rotor shook violently, throwing Sarah and against their harnesses. Alarms blared inside the cockpit. The helicopter's systems had been hit. Smoke curled from the engine compartment and warning lights blinked red. "Evasive maneuvers," Sarah barked, her training taking over. Her fingers moved instinctively over the controls, banking, twisting, and diving to avoid incoming fire. But the valley was narrow, and the mountains offered little cover. Every second brought another hail of bullets, and she could hear the distant gunfire of the SEALs below, struggling to hold their position. An RPG slammed into the Black Hawk's side. The cockpit shuddered violently, screamed, gripping his controls, blood mixing with sweat on his brow. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her arm as debris from the cockpit panel cut her skin. The helicopter lurched violently, and she knew immediately the chopper wasn't going to make it out. She fought to keep it steady, eyes scanning for a landing site among jagged rocks and sheer cliffs. The crash was inevitable. Metal screamed as the helicopter slammed into a rocky slope. The impact threw Sarah forward, knocking the wind out of her lungs. Glass shattered, metal twisted, and the once proud aircraft lay crumpled among the stones. Dazed, bloodied, and bruised, she unbuckled herself, pushing through pain to assess the situation. Was unconscious, his face pale and covered in blood. Her gunner, stationed in the rear, was already gone, killed in the initial strike. Sarah's first thought was the seals. She needed to reach them to make sure they were alive. Her boots crunched against loose rock as she crawled from the wreckage. Smoke curled into the sky from the helicopter, a small beacon of devastation against the morning sun. She could hear the gunfire echoing off the mountains, closer now, more intense. Somewhere down in the valley, the seals were pinned, outnumbered, and vulnerable. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to take cover, to wait for reinforcements. But Sarah refused. She was not going to sit back and watch men die when she could act. Her fingers grazed her wounds, tasting coppery blood, but she forced herself forward. She crawled, half running, half dragging herself over rocks, every movement a battle against pain and exhaustion. As she neared the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley, she spotted them, 5 figures crouched behind boulders, rifles raised, firing at shadowy forms emerging from the terrain. The SEAL team, bloodied and bruised themselves, had taken cover and were holding on by sheer will. Their commander, Mark Hawk, a seasoned veteran with a steely gaze, looked up and froze. Then he recognized her. "Sarah, you're alive," he shouted, disbelief and relief mingling in his voice. "I'm here," she replied, her voice raw but determined. "Let's finish this." She grabbed a fallen rifle, her military training overriding the pain in her body. Every muscle, every thought, every nerve was focused on the fight ahead. The SEALs looked to her, seeing not just a pilot but a warrior. In that moment, Lieutenant Sarah became more than a rescuer. She became the force the SEALs needed, the one person who could tip the scales in a valley where death awaited every misstep. Bloodied, broken, and battered, she was ready to face what no one thought possible, a fight that would test her body, mind, and spirit in ways she could never have imagined. And as the morning sun cast jagged shadows across the mountains, Sarah stepped fully into her destiny. The valley below was chaos incarnate. Smoke rose in thin, curling plumes, mixing with the dust and dirt kicked up by incoming fire. The SEAL team was pinned behind jagged boulders, rifles raised, their faces streaked with sweat and blood. Insurgents emerged from the shadows like ghosts, firing with ruthless precision. Each second stretched painfully long, each heartbeat echoing in Sarah's ears as she struggled to gain her bearings on the rocky slope above. Sarah's body ached from the crash. Her left arm throbbed where shrapnel had grazed it, her legs trembled, and her head throbbed with the dull hammering of a concussion. Every instinct screamed for her to retreat, to find cover, to avoid becoming another casualty. But her mind was sharper than ever. She knew the SEALs could not hold out without help. She had volunteered for this mission, and now she was the only immediate help they had. "Sarah, can you hear me?" crackled the radio in her helmet. Static, nothing. The crash had destroyed their communication systems. The Black Hawk, once their lifeline to command and backup, was now a burning husk at the edge of the ridge. Sarah's first thought was to reach the SEALs and organize a defense. She scrambled down the rocky slope, using every ounce of strength to maneuver across loose stones and jagged rock. Every movement brought agony. Her body protested with every step, yet she refused to pause. Failure was not an option. Lives depended on her. Below, the SEALs' commander, Mark Hawk, shouted orders. "Suppressive fire, keep their heads down." His team responded, exchanging bursts of gunfire with the insurgents, but they were outnumbered 20-1. Their cover was crumbling. Every boulder they crouched behind seemed too small, too weak, against the wave of enemy fighters pressing closer. When she reached a low ridge near the SEALs, Sarah dropped to her knees, scanning for weapons. The bodies of fallen soldiers were scattered among the rocks, rifles and ammo lying in the dirt. She grabbed a M4 carbine from a dead SEAL, testing the magazine, feeling the comforting weight of the weapon in her hands. It wasn't the aircraft, it wasn't her piloting skills, but it was something she could control, something that could make a difference. "Sarah, over here," Hawk shouted. The young pilot crawled toward him, her blood-streaked uniform blending with the dusty earth. Her presence brought a surge of hope to the men, a spark of determination that had been fading with each passing minute. They were tired, scared, and battered, but seeing Sarah alive and ready to fight, gave them renewed courage. The insurgents pressed their attack. Hidden in the shadows of the valley walls, they advanced in waves, firing from concealed positions. Sarah fired back, her movements precise despite the pain and exhaustion. Each shot hit its mark, each movement calculated. She was no longer a pilot, she was a soldier, a guardian, a lifeline. Hours passed like an eternity. The SEALs were running low on ammunition. Hawk's calm demeanor had begun to falter under the relentless pressure, but Sarah remained focused. She crawled from one boulder to another, covering their retreat as best she could, firing bursts from her rifle while scanning for weak points in the enemy lines. Her bloodied hands shook, but only slightly, her training overpowering the fatigue. Then came the moment that changed everything. From a ridge above, a sniper took aim at Hawk. The shot rang out and he went down, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his uniform. Panic threatened to overtake the SEALs, but Sarah reacted instantly. She fired her rifle with surgical precision, taking out the sniper before he could take another shot. Hawk looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You saved me," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "No time to thank me," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "We're not done yet. We need to hold them until backup arrives or figure out another way." But backup wasn't coming. She knew this instinctively. The terrain, the anti-aircraft positions, the sheer number of insurgents, the valley was effectively sealed. The SEALs were isolated. If they didn't find a way to fight back, they would all be dead. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't fly the Black Hawk, it was destroyed. Communications were down. The insurgents were advancing steadily and the SEALs were exhausted. Every option seemed impossible. And yet, in the midst of despair, a single thought crystallized. If they couldn't call for help, she would become the help. If the enemy controlled the ground, she would dominate the sky, or what remained of it. Her decision was immediate, instinctive. She would return to the wrecked helicopter, salvage whatever weapon systems remained intact, and use them to strike from above. It was insane, dangerous, nearly suicidal. Yet she had no choice. Lives depended on it. She turned to Hawk and the remaining SEALs, her voice cutting through the gunfire. "Cover me. I'm going back to the helicopter. I can stop them." The men hesitated, knowing what it meant, but then they saw the fire in her eyes. There was no room for doubt. Slowly, they began providing covering fire, keeping the insurgents at bay while Sarah crawled back to the wreckage. When she reached the Black Hawk, the full extent of the damage became apparent. Metal twisted into unnatural angles, rotor blades splintered, and smoke still rose from the engine compartment. Her first thought was despair, but she pushed it aside. She had to find something, anything, that could be used as a weapon. Hours passed as she scavenged through the wreckage, removing debris, inspecting weapon systems, and preparing what little remained for use. Her hands were bloody, her arms scraped and bruised, but her mind was razor-sharp. She rigged the helicopters and rockets, testing their firing mechanisms as best she could. If this worked, she could become a devastating force from above, leveling the enemy positions and buying the SEALs a chance to survive. Below, the SEALs continued to fight desperately. Every movement was a struggle, every shot carried the weight of life and death. But as they looked up, they began to see signs of hope. A figure emerging from the wreckage, bloodied but determined, ready to change the tide of battle. Sarah's courage and ingenuity transformed fear into action, despair into resolve. She wasn't just surviving, she was taking control, turning impossible odds into a chance for victory. The valley, once a death trap, was about to become the stage for an act of heroism that would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. In the chaos of that Afghan morning, with the sun casting jagged shadows over the mountains and enemy fire raging relentlessly, one thing was clear. Lieutenant Sarah would not be defeated. She would fight. She would survive. and she would do everything in her power to save the SEALs pinned below. The valley below was a hellscape of smoke, dirt, and gunfire, and Lieutenant Sarah knew time was running out. The SEAL team she had come to aid was exhausted, wounded, and increasingly outnumbered. She crouched behind a jagged boulder, rifle in hand, heart pounding, as insurgents pressed forward with relentless aggression. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the screech of bullets, and the muffled shouts of men under fire. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to preserve herself, but instinct alone would not save the team pinned below. They needed her. Mark Hawk, the SEAL's commander, barked orders as he tried to maintain a defensive perimeter. The team's positions were collapsing under enemy pressure. One misstep could mean annihilation. Then he saw her, crawling across the rocky slope, blood streaked across her face, ragged cuts marring her uniform and carrying a fallen SEAL's M4. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, disbelief and hope mingled in his gaze. "Sarah, how are you alive?" he shouted, disbelief cutting through the chaos. "I'm here," she replied firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now let's finish this." Without waiting for approval, Sarah moved into position, firing controlled bursts at insurgents advancing from cover to cover. Her precision, honed by countless hours of coordination, translated seamlessly into infantry marksmanship. Each shot counted. Each bullet found its target. Slowly, the SEALs began to rally, their morale bolstered by her audacity. For the next few hours, the valley became a deadly chessboard. Insurgents emerged in waves, attempting to flank, to encircle, to overrun the team. Sarah moved fluidly, providing suppressive fire, guiding the SEALs to better cover, and using the rocky terrain to their advantage. She coordinated movements almost instinctively, drawing from her training as a pilot where timing and precision dictated life or death. In the thick of the firefight, she became less a support unit and more a force multiplier. Still, the odds were terrifying. The SEALs were heavily outnumbered, and reinforcements from command were hours away if they even arrived at all. Sarah could see the weariness in the team's eyes, hear the ragged breaths, the low groans of men injured but refusing to fall. The air was electric with tension, a delicate balance between survival and catastrophe. At one point, a bullet struck the rock near her head, sending shards of stone into her hair. She flinched but did not stop firing. Nearby, a young SEAL, barely 21, froze under pressure. Sarah shouted over the cacophony, "Move, keep shooting, you're not leaving anyone behind." The young man snapped to action, inspired by her sheer determination, returning fire with renewed purpose. Then came the moment that would test her courage like never before. A sniper perched on a ridge above had the SEALs in his sights. Hawk, while returning fire, was wounded in the shoulder, collapsing behind cover. Panic threatened to take over the remaining men, but Sarah acted instantly. Crawling forward under heavy fire, she sighted the sniper's position and took a deep, steadying breath. With a precise shot, she neutralized the threat, and the SEALs erupted in relieved shouts. Hawk looked up at her, disbelief etched into his face. "You saved me," he gasped, blood dripping from his shoulder. "No time for thanks," Sarah replied, her voice taut with urgency. "We're not done. We need a plan or we're all going to die down there." It was then that the grim reality hit her. The SEALs could not hold this position indefinitely. Their ammo was dwindling, their energy failing, and the insurgents showed no sign of slowing. Sarah scanned the battlefield with keen eyes, calculating every angle, every possible approach. She needed a new strategy. Retreat seemed impossible. Reinforcements were not coming. The SEALs' fate rested on a desperate gamble. She turned to Hawk, determination blazing in her eyes. "We're going back to the wrecked helicopter. I can make it work. We can hit them from above." Hawk's expression was a mixture of fear and incredulity. "Are you insane? That thing's destroyed. You can't." "Yes, I can," Sarah interrupted. "We don't have a choice." The SEALs were silent for a moment, absorbing the audacity of her plan. Then, seeing the fire in her eyes and the resolve in her posture, they nodded. Slowly, they provided covering fire as Sarah crawled back toward the remains of the Black Hawk. Every step was agony, every movement a test of endurance. Her bloodied hands tore at jagged rocks, her legs burned with exertion, yet she pressed on. Survival was not just for her. It was for the men pinned below, and she refused to fail them. Reaching the wreckage, Sarah surveyed the damage. The helicopter was a twisted skeleton of metal, the rotor shattered, fuselage dented and smoking. Most would have given up at that sight, but she didn't have the luxury of despair. Her training, her instincts, and her sheer force of will told her to act, to improvise, to take what remained and make it a weapon. She climbed into the wreckage, assessing what systems could still function. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating angles, firing sequences, and tactical advantages. She scavenged the helicopter's weapons, testing the in-rocket pods, improvising connections, rigging triggers to function manually. Every motion was precise, every decision calculated. Hours passed, but Sarah worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that the SEALs' survival depended on her success. Meanwhile, the SEALs continued their fight in the valley below. They were battered, their positions weakening, yet the presence of Sarah gave them hope. Every glance toward the ridge where she worked, every muffled shout of determination strengthened their resolve. They knew she would not fail. Finally, Sarah was ready. She moved into the makeshift cockpit position, testing weapons remotely, preparing to unleash a fury from above that no insurgent could anticipate. Her face was bloodied, her uniform torn, her body screaming with exhaustion and pain, yet her eyes burned with unyielding determination. She was ready to become the angel of fire, whispered about in hushed tones in military mess halls, a single force capable of turning the tide of battle. And then, as she took aim, surveying the valley from above, she saw the enemy advancing once more. It was the moment of truth, the moment that would define not just the mission, but every life in that valley. Sarah, bloodied and broken, had a choice: retreat and hope, or fight and risk everything. She gritted her teeth, her fingers tightening on the controls. "Time to finish this," she muttered. From that ruined helicopter, overlooking the valley filled with smoke, gunfire, and chaos, Lieutenant Sarah was about to rewrite what it meant to survive, and to fight with courage that would be remembered long after the sun set on the mountains of Afghanistan. The valley below was a hellscape of smoke, dirt, and gunfire, and Lieutenant Sarah knew time was running out. The SEAL team she had come to aid was exhausted, wounded, and increasingly outnumbered. She crouched behind a jagged boulder, rifle in hand, heart pounding, as insurgents pressed forward with relentless aggression. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the screech of bullets, and the muffled shouts of men under fire. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to preserve herself, but instinct alone would not save the team pinned below. They needed her. Mark Hawk, the SEAL's commander, barked orders as he tried to maintain a defensive perimeter. The team's positions were collapsing under enemy pressure. One misstep could mean annihilation. Then he saw her, crawling across the rocky slope, blood streaked across her face, ragged cuts marring her uniform and carrying a fallen SEAL's M4. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, disbelief and hope mingled in his gaze. "Sarah, how are you alive?" he shouted, disbelief cutting through the chaos. "I'm here," she replied firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now let's finish this." Without waiting for approval, Sarah moved into position, firing controlled bursts at insurgents advancing from cover to cover. Her precision, honed by countless hours of coordination, translated seamlessly into infantry marksmanship. Each shot counted. Each bullet found its target. Slowly, the SEALs began to rally, their morale bolstered by her audacity. For the next few hours, the valley became a deadly chessboard. Insurgents emerged in waves, attempting to flank, to encircle, to overrun the team. Sarah moved fluidly, providing suppressive fire, guiding the SEALs to better cover, and using the rocky terrain to their advantage. She coordinated movements almost instinctively, drawing from her training as a pilot where timing and precision dictated life or death. In the thick of the firefight, she became less a support unit and more a force multiplier. Still, the odds were terrifying. The SEALs were heavily outnumbered, and reinforcements from command were hours away if they even arrived at all. Sarah could see the weariness in the team's eyes, hear the ragged breaths, the low groans of men injured but refusing to fall. The air was electric with tension, a delicate balance between survival and catastrophe. At one point, a bullet struck the rock near her head, sending shards of stone into her hair. She flinched but did not stop firing. Nearby, a young SEAL, barely 21, froze under pressure. Sarah shouted over the cacophony, "Move, keep shooting, you're not leaving anyone behind." The young man snapped to action, inspired by her sheer determination, returning fire with renewed purpose. Then came the moment that would test her courage like never before. A sniper perched on a ridge above had the SEALs in his sights. Hawk, while returning fire, was wounded in the shoulder, collapsing behind cover. Panic threatened to take over the remaining men, but Sarah acted instantly. Crawling forward under heavy fire, she sighted the sniper's position and took a deep, steadying breath. With a precise shot, she neutralized the threat, and the SEALs erupted in relieved shouts. Hawk looked up at her, disbelief etched into his face. "You saved me," he gasped, blood dripping from his shoulder. "No time for thanks," Sarah replied, her voice taut with urgency. "We're not done. We need a plan or we're all going to die down there." It was then that the grim reality hit her. The SEALs could not hold this position indefinitely. Their ammo was dwindling, their energy failing, and the insurgents showed no sign of slowing. Sarah scanned the battlefield with keen eyes, calculating every angle, every possible approach. She needed a new strategy. Retreat seemed impossible. Reinforcements were not coming. The SEALs' fate rested on a desperate gamble. She turned to Hawk, determination blazing in her eyes. "We're going back to the wrecked helicopter. I can make it work. We can hit them from above." Hawk's expression was a mixture of fear and incredulity. "Are you insane? That thing's destroyed. You can't." "Yes, I can," Sarah interrupted. "We don't have a choice." The SEALs were silent for a moment, absorbing the audacity of her plan. Then, seeing the fire in her eyes and the resolve in her posture, they nodded. Slowly, they provided covering fire as Sarah crawled back toward the remains of the Black Hawk. Every step was agony, every movement a test of endurance. Her bloodied hands tore at jagged rocks, her legs burned with exertion, yet she pressed on. Survival was not just for her. It was for the men pinned below, and she refused to fail them. Reaching the wreckage, Sarah surveyed the damage. The helicopter was a twisted skeleton of metal, the rotor shattered, fuselage dented and smoking. Most would have given up at that sight, but she didn't have the luxury of despair. Her training, her instincts, and her sheer force of will told her to act, to improvise, to take what remained and make it a weapon. She climbed into the wreckage, assessing what systems could still function. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating angles, firing sequences, and tactical advantages. She scavenged the helicopter's weapons, testing the in-rocket pods, improvising connections, rigging triggers to function manually. Every motion was precise, every decision calculated. Hours passed, but Sarah worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that the SEALs' survival depended on her success. Meanwhile, the SEALs continued their fight in the valley below. They were battered, their positions weakening, yet the presence of Sarah gave them hope. Every glance toward the ridge where she worked, every muffled shout of determination strengthened their resolve. They knew she would not fail. Finally, Sarah was ready. She moved into the makeshift cockpit position, testing weapons remotely, preparing to unleash a fury from above that no insurgent could anticipate. Her face was bloodied, her uniform torn, her body screaming with exhaustion and pain, yet her eyes burned with unyielding determination. She was ready to become the angel of fire, whispered about in hushed tones in military mess halls, a single force capable of turning the tide of battle. And then, as she took aim, surveying the valley from above, she saw the enemy advancing once more. It was the moment of truth, the moment that would define not just the mission, but every life in that valley. Sarah, bloodied and broken, had a choice: retreat and hope, or fight and risk everything. She gritted her teeth, her fingers tightening on the controls. "Time to finish this," she muttered. From that ruined helicopter, overlooking the valley filled with smoke, gunfire, and chaos, Lieutenant Sarah was about to rewrite what it meant to survive, and to fight with courage that would be remembered long after the sun set on the mountains of Afghanistan. The valley was a deadly maze of chaos, smoke curling in the heat of the midday sun, and insurgent fire ricocheting off rock walls. Lieutenant Sarah crouched behind the twisted fuselage of the Black Hawk, blood streaked across her face and uniform, the weight of exhaustion pressing on every limb. Her arms trembled from hours of firing, crawling, and improvising repairs on the wrecked helicopter, but the SEAL's survival depended on her. Retreat was no longer an option. Failure wasn't just personal, it would cost lives. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and assessed what remained of her aircraft's weapon systems. The Black Hawk had been gutted by the crash, but it still had a few functional components. The rocket pods were damaged but repairable. Sarah's hands moved methodically, scanning wires and connections, rerouting circuits, and improvising triggers using scraps of the cockpit's electronics. Sweat and blood blurred her vision, but her focus was sharper than ever. Every second wasted could mean the SEALs being overrun. The insurgents were relentless, closing in on the team's position, unaware that salvation would soon come from the twisted wreckage above. Hours of firefight had taken their toll on the SEALs. Hawk leaned against a rock, his blood-soaked uniform a testament to the battle he had fought to protect his men. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe and concern, his voice strained. "Sarah, you don't have to do this alone. We can hold them for a while." "I'm not holding back," Sarah said, her voice raw but determined. "If they come for you, they'll regret it." She tested a makeshift firing trigger for the watching as it whirred to life, the mechanical roar echoing across the valley. Sparks flew and a bullet ricocheted off a nearby rock, narrowly missing her. She flinched but smiled grimly. It worked. She could fight back, not just survive. The SEALs provided covering fire, pinning the insurgents as Sarah climbed into the wrecked cockpit. The angle was precarious, and each step required careful calculation to avoid further injury. Her legs burned from the climb, her hands raw from gripping jagged metal edges, but she ignored the pain. Her mind was singularly focused on one goal: to turn the tide of battle, to protect the men who had fought so valiantly below. Once in position, Sarah surveyed the enemy formations. Insurgents were advancing in coordinated waves, confident in their numerical superiority. She adjusted the weapons, sighting targets with precision, her pilot instincts now guiding infantry-style assaults. Her first shots tore through enemy cover, this rapid fire creating chaos among their ranks. Rockets streaked across the valley, exploding with terrifying force, sending dirt and smoke into the air. Insurgents fell in waves, their advance disrupted, their morale shaken. Below, the SEALs watched in disbelief. Sarah was no longer just a pilot. She was a force of nature, raining destruction from above. Her improvisation and bravery inspired them to hold their positions, to fight with renewed vigor. The impossible was becoming possible. Hours stretched into an eternity as Sarah maintained the aerial assault. Every action required calculation. One wrong move could destroy the helicopter entirely, or worse, hit friendly forces. She had to balance aggression with precision, destruction with strategy. Sweat stung her eyes, blood dripped from cuts across her forehead, but she remained unwavering. Each insurgent taken out brought a surge of hope to the men below. At one point, an enemy sniper attempted to climb a ridge to target Sarah directly. Without hesitation, she pivoted, tracking him with surgical accuracy. A burst of fire cut him down before he could fire. Hawk, leaning against a boulder and clutching his wounded shoulder, looked up in astonishment. "She's incredible," he muttered. Sarah's mind was a storm of calculations, tactics, and courage. She realized that her improvisation had given the SEALs a fighting chance they otherwise wouldn't have had. The enemy's confidence was shattered, replaced by confusion and fear. Her actions were not just survival, They were strategy, turning desperation into advantage. Yet even as the tide began to turn, danger remained relentless. Additional insurgent forces approached, seeking to flank the SEALs from the valley's narrow passes. Sarah's weapons were overheating, the helicopter groaning under the strain, metal screeching with every movement. She had to make the impossible decision: push the aircraft to its limits or risk being overwhelmed. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your ground. Don't move unless I say." She adjusted firing angles, coordinating with the SEALs as if they were a single unit, the synergy of sky and ground creating an almost unstoppable force. Rockets exploded, fire tore through cover, and the insurgents faltered under the relentless pressure. In that moment, Sarah became more than a rescuer. She became a legend in the making. Her courage, ingenuity, and relentless determination created a shield around the SEALs. Lives that might have been lost were saved, and the impossible became reality. Every movement, every shot, every decision was a testament to her training, her spirit, and her refusal to accept defeat. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours, a temporary lull fell over the battlefield. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with the scent of scorched earth and gunpowder. The insurgents had been forced to retreat temporarily, regrouping behind rocks and ridges, wary of the angel of fire who had turned their assault into a nightmare. The SEALs were battered, bruised, and bleeding, yet their eyes were alive with renewed hope. Hawk looked up at the wrecked Black Hawk, at the woman who had taken command of the battlefield, and nodded. "You saved us," he said, voice thick with emotion. Sarah, exhausted beyond measure, allowed herself a small smile. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady despite the fatigue and pain. "But we've bought some time. That's all that matters." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the battlefield settled into a tense silence. The insurgents would regroup, reinforcements would arrive, and the fight was far from over. But for the first time, the SEALs dared to believe they could survive this nightmare. And at the center of it all, Lieutenant Sarah remained bloodied, broken, but unbowed, a force of improvisation, courage, and indomitable will, ready to face whatever came next. Every man in that valley knew one thing: she was not just a pilot. She was their lifeline, their shield, and their weapon. And the battle that had seemed impossible just hours ago was no longer a hopeless struggle. With Sarah above, guiding the fight, there was a chance. A slim chance, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. And in war, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The valley below had become a battlefield of chaos, smoke, and the screams of men and metal alike. Lieutenant Sarah, bloodied and bruised, crouched in the wrecked cockpit of her Black Hawk, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion, adrenaline, and pain. Her improvised firing mechanism for the rocket pods was ready. Every calculation she had made over the past hours converged in this moment. She was about to unleash destruction from above, and the SEALs pinned below were relying entirely on her. The insurgents, unaware of the deadly force preparing to rain down upon them, continued their assault with arrogant confidence. They moved through the valley in coordinated waves, their strategy meticulous but predictable. Sarah's eyes, sharp with focus, tracked their every movement. She adjusted the Black Hawk's weapons, manually aiming and firing, each trigger press precise, each burst calculated. The roared to life, spraying the advancing enemy with deadly efficiency. Rockets streaked across the morning sky, exploding with violent force against enemy cover. Below, the SEALs watched in stunned disbelief. They had fought valiantly, their courage unshakable, but the appearance of Sarah, alive and relentless, shifted the balance entirely. She was no longer a pilot providing support. She was a force of nature, an angel of destruction descending from the sky, and her presence electrified the men. Hawk, clutching his wounded shoulder and leaning against a boulder, shouted to the others, "Hold your ground. Watch her work." They fired sporadically to keep the enemy suppressed, but it was clear the tide had changed. Sarah's assault was systematic, devastating, and unstoppable. Every insurgent movement was anticipated, every threat neutralized before it could reach the SEALs. For hours she maintained the barrage, using her aerial advantage to devastating effect. Her body trembled with pain, her cuts and bruises screaming with every movement, but her mind was unyielding. The roar of the fiery streak of rockets and the chaos below created a deadly symphony, and Sarah was the conductor. At one point, a group of insurgents attempted to flank the SEALs from the ridge above. Sarah pivoted, her aim flawless despite the improvised controls. Bullets tore through cover, cutting down the enemy before they could strike. Below, the SEALs exchanged looks of awe and relief. Hawk muttered under his breath, "She's unbelievable." But the battle was far from over. Reinforcements of insurgents began to arrive from deeper in the valley, trying to encircle the SEALs. Sarah realized that if she did not act decisively, they could be overwhelmed. Her mind raced through possibilities: rocket strikes, fire, terrain advantage. Every decision carried the weight of life or death. She was acutely aware that one miscalculation could kill her team or herself in an instant. Taking a deep breath, she initiated a sequence of attacks that was both daring and precise. She fired rockets in a calculated arc, targeting enemy cover while keeping the SEALs out of harm's way. The valley erupted in fire and smoke, the insurgents screaming and scattering in chaos. Her actions created corridors for the SEALs to maneuver, to reposition, and to regroup for a counterattack. Hours blurred together. Sarah barely noticed the passage of time, consumed entirely by the rhythm of battle. Each breath, each heartbeat, each trigger pull was synchronized with the survival of the men below. Her improvisation, ingenuity, and sheer willpower had transformed her from a downed pilot into a tactical weapon, a living embodiment of courage and determination. The insurgents began to falter, their advance collapsing under the unrelenting pressure. Confusion and fear spread among their ranks. They had not expected a lone pilot to rise from the wreckage and dominate the battlefield with such precision and brutality. Every man taken down by her firepower became a testament to the impossible, a demonstration that courage and skill could defy overwhelming odds. Sarah's voice cut through the roar of weapons, shouting to the SEALs below, "Hold your position, keep moving when I signal, don't let them regroup." Her commands were steady, authoritative, and inspiring. The men responded, moving strategically, using the chaos she had created to their advantage. Every action she took was a lifeline, every shot fired a measure of protection. But exhaustion and injuries were relentless. Sarah's arms ached, her vision blurred, and every movement caused fresh pain in her bruised body. Sweat and blood mixed on her skin, streaking across her uniform and face. Yet she did not stop. Retreat was not an option. Surrender was unthinkable. Survival required total commitment, and Sarah had given everything she had. As the battle reached its peak, she realized the insurgents' morale had crumbled. Their coordinated assault had turned into a desperate scramble. Rockets streaked through the valley, bullets tore through cover, and smoke choked the air. Sarah continued to push forward, each maneuver calculated to maximize damage to the enemy while minimizing risk to the SEALs. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the insurgents began to retreat in disarray, abandoning their positions in a panicked rush to escape the relentless onslaught. The valley, once teeming with enemies, was quieting under the haze of smoke and fire. Sarah, panting and bloodied, lowered her weapon slightly, surveying the aftermath of her improvised assault. The SEALs below slowly emerged from cover, bruised, exhausted, but alive. Hawk looked up at her with admiration and gratitude, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us all. You're insane and brilliant." Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile. "We're not finished yet," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "But we've bought time, and that's all that matters." For the first time since the ambush began, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to absorb the reality of what she had accomplished. The SEALs were alive, the immediate threat neutralized, and the impossible had been made possible. She had turned the tide of battle with courage, ingenuity, and relentless determination, proving that one person's will could defy overwhelming odds. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the smoke and chaos of the valley, Sarah remained bloodied, broken, but unbowed. She had become the Angel of Fire, a name that would echo in whispers among those who survived this day. She was more than a pilot. She was a force of nature, a beacon of hope, and a symbol of courage under fire. Her eyes scanned the valley, aware that more danger could arrive at any moment. But for now, the seals were safe, the enemy rooted, and Sarah had proven that even in the darkest moments, ingenuity, bravery, and unwavering determination could turn the tide of fate. And in that smoky, blood-soaked valley, Lieutenant Sarah prepared herself for whatever came next, ready to fight, ready to survive, and ready to protect those who depended on her with every ounce of strength she possessed. The valley was now a grim tableau of destruction. Smoke curled upward from scorched earth, mingling with dust kicked up by sporadic gunfire, and the stench of gunpowder filled the air. Lieutenant Sarah, still perched in the wrecked Black Hawk, her uniform tattered and bloodied, knew the battle was far from over. The insurgents had regrouped, reinforced by hidden forces that had slipped through unnoticed, and they were preparing for a final, decisive assault. Below, the SEALs were battered, their ammunition running dangerously low. Hawk leaned against a jagged boulder, struggling to breathe through the pain in his wounded shoulder. He had been shot during the earlier flanking attempt, and the makeshift bandage did little to stem the bleeding. Around him, the team tried to maintain order, but exhaustion, injuries, and fear gnawed at their resolve. Sarah's mind raced as she assessed the situation. The valley was a trap, narrow and enclosed, with enemy positions commanding every possible approach. If the insurgents launched another coordinated attack, the SEALs would be overwhelmed instantly. Communication with command was still down, and any hope of external reinforcements was slim at best. Time was their enemy, and Sarah knew she had to act decisively. She called out to the SEALs below, "Hold your positions. I'll create openings for you. Stay alive." Her voice, though strained, carried authority and urgency. She adjusted the Black Hawk's weapons, preparing to fire from her precarious perch. Her body ached, every limb screaming in protest, but the thought of the men below, pinned and desperate, fueled her determination. The first wave of reinforcements arrived sooner than expected. A squad of insurgents, moving cautiously but with lethal intent, began to flank the SEALs from a narrow pass. Sarah reacted immediately, unleashing a torrent of fire from them. Bullets shredded cover and rockets streaked across the sky, detonating with precision. The insurgents faltered, their advance broken by the relentless barrage from above. Hawk gritted his teeth as he fired his weapon one-handed, covering the retreat of a wounded teammate. But then a second wave struck, larger and more coordinated. Sarah saw the danger instantly. She was forced to make split-second decisions, direct fire to break the assault, guide the SEALs to safer positions, and manage the overheating weapon systems of the Black Hawk. Each action was a balance of precision and desperation. The insurgents' renewed attack was fierce. They pressed with determination, using cover, smoke, and terrain to their advantage. One group managed to climb the ridge, attempting to cut off the SEALs entirely. Sarah pivoted firing bursts that tore through enemy cover with deadly efficiency. Explosions from rockets sent dirt and rock into the air, creating chaos in the enemy ranks. The SEALs seized the opportunity to reposition, their morale bolstered by Sarah's devastating aerial support. But the battle came at a cost. Hawk, while covering the movement of his men, was struck again, this time mortally. Blood seeped through his uniform as he collapsed against a boulder, his eyes meeting Sarah's. Pain and disbelief flashed across his face, but he managed a faint, approving nod. "You take charge, Sarah." His voice was weak, but the command was clear. Responsibility now rested entirely on her shoulders. The weight of leadership settled on Sarah. She was no longer just providing fire support. She was the commander in the valley, coordinating defense, directing fire, and inspiring the remaining SEALs. Her voice cut through the chaos, precise and unwavering. "Hold your line. Move when I say. Cover each other." the men responded, their trust in her absolute, even in the face of exhaustion and fear. The insurgents pressed harder, sensing the opportunity to eliminate the remaining SEALs. But Sarah's tactical acumen shone. Using terrain to her advantage, she orchestrated a deadly defense, luring enemy forces into kill zones and maximizing the impact of her aerial assault. Each shot, each rocket, was calculated to disrupt, confuse, and decimate the enemy without endangering the SEALs. As hours stretched into an unbearable siege, Sarah's body reached its limits. Her arms trembled, her vision blurred from blood and sweat, and each movement was agony. Yet her determination never wavered. Every man still alive in that valley depended on her courage and ingenuity. Retreat was impossible, surrender was unthinkable. She would hold the line, no matter the cost. The insurgents' morale began to crumble under the relentless pressure. Their flanking maneuvers were thwarted, their formations broken, and panic began to spread among their ranks. Sarah, bloodied and bruised, seized the moment to push forward with precision strikes, targeting concentrated groups with fire and rockets. The valley erupted in explosions, the cacophony masking the cries of the enemy as they were forced to retreat temporarily. Below, the SEALs regrouped, their trust in Sarah absolute. Hawk's men, battered but alive, moved strategically under her guidance. Each step, each shot was part of a coordinated effort, a seamless fusion of ground and aerial tactics that only a mind like Sarah's could orchestrate under such extreme conditions. Despite the temporary reprieve, Sarah knew the fight was not over. Reinforcements could arrive at any moment, and the insurgents would not give up so easily. She surveyed the valley, calculating angles, distances, and vulnerabilities. Her improvisation, courage, and tactical brilliance had kept the SEALs alive thus far, but the coming hours would demand everything she had. With Hawk gone, the responsibility of command weighed heavily on Sarah. She communicated precise instructions to the SEALs, using hand signals and shouted commands to coordinate movement, suppress enemy fire, and maintain defensive positions. Every decision was critical, every choice a matter of life or death. The valley had become a crucible, testing her physical limits, mental acuity, and indomitable will. As dusk approached, the valley remained tense. Smoke and dust mingled with the fading sunlight, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The SEALs were exhausted, their wounds raw, but their determination was renewed. They had survived against impossible odds, and their survival owed everything to the courage and ingenuity of Lieutenant Sarah. In the quiet moments between waves of attacks, she allowed herself a brief reflection. Every scar, every bruise, every drop of blood was a testament to the fight, a reminder of the lives she had preserved and the sacrifices made. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a commander, a warrior, and the linchpin of survival for those she led. And as night fell over the valley, Sarah remained vigilant. The insurgents were defeated for now, but she knew the fight was far from over. With the responsibility of command fully resting on her shoulders, she prepared for the next wave, ready to protect the SEALs at any cost and determined to survive against all odds. The valley had become a crucible of fire, blood, and courage, and at its center stood Sarah, bloodied, broken, but unbowed, ready to face whatever came next with unwavering resolve and fierce determination. Night had fallen over the valley, casting long, jagged shadows across the blood-soaked earth. Lieutenant Sarah, perched in the wrecked Black Hawk, her body battered and drenched in blood and sweat, knew the final battle was imminent. The insurgents had regrouped for a decisive push, their numbers reinforced, their intent deadly. Below, the surviving SEALs, bruised and exhausted, themselves for what might be the last stand of the day. Sarah's body ached. Every movement was a torment, burns from the helicopter's engines, cuts from jagged metal, bruises that throbbed with every heartbeat. Her arms shook from holding the weight of weapon systems far beyond her weakened frame. Yet every wound, every scar was a testament to survival, to courage, and to unyielding resolve. She had to act now decisively, or all would be lost. "Hold your positions," she shouted to the SEALs below, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the smoke and chaos. Her eyes scanned the valley, calculating enemy positions, movements, and vulnerabilities. The final strike had to be perfect, no margin for error, no hesitation. Every calculation she had made over the past hours came together in this singular moment of truth. The insurgents began their advance, moving through the dim light with reckless determination. Their confidence was bolstered by the belief that the SEALs were weakened, isolated, and vulnerable. They had not anticipated what lay above them: a pilot who had turned a wrecked helicopter into a weapon of unprecedented lethality. Sarah adjusted the Black Hawk's weapons, manually calibrating the rocket pods. Sparks flew as circuits fused and rewired under her hands. Sweat and blood blurred her vision, but she remained unyielding. The first burst of fire tore through the shadows, bullets shredding cover and disorienting enemy ranks. Rockets streaked across the valley, exploding with terrifying force. The insurgents faltered, scrambling for cover, their confidence shattered by the relentless assault from above. Below, the SEALs moved with renewed coordination. Every shot fired, every movement made was guided by Sarah's commands. Her voice, unwavering even in exhaustion, became the thread holding the team together. Hawk's men, battered and bleeding, now acted with precision, their morale bolstered by the spectacle of her improvised strike. Yet the battle was far from over. Another wave of insurgents emerged from hidden ravines, advancing in a coordinated push to crush the SEALs entirely. Sarah's fingers tightened on the improvised controls, her mind racing through angles, trajectories, and timing. She had one chance, one opportunity to unleash a strike so devastating it would break the enemy's morale and secure survival for the SEALs. She launched rockets with pinpoint accuracy, targeting concentrations of enemy forces. Explosions ripped through the valley, sending men and debris flying. Smoke and fire enveloped the battlefield, creating chaos among the insurgents. They roared, tearing through cover and eliminating threats before they could advance. The valley became a symphony of destruction, orchestrated by a single, bloodied woman whose courage and ingenuity logic. The surviving insurgents, sensing the fury descending upon them, began to retreat, attempting to regroup and mount a final attack. Sarah, aware that hesitation could cost lives, intensified her assault. Rockets streaked through the darkness, tore through cover, and every movement of the Black Hawk was a calculated act of devastation. The enemy's numbers began to dwindle, their morale collapsing under the unrelenting firepower. Below, the SEALs pressed forward, taking advantage of the chaos to secure their positions. Every order Sarah issued, every calculated shot from above, allowed the team to reposition, regroup, and hold the valley against overwhelming odds. Hawk, though mortally wounded, smiled faintly, pride and relief shining through the pain. "She's incredible," he whispered, barely audible above the roar of the weapons. Hours of relentless combat stretched on, each minute a battle of endurance, courage, and strategy. Sarah's body screamed for rest, her vision blurred with blood, sweat, and exhaustion, yet she continued to fire, coordinate, and command. Her improvisation had transformed a hopeless situation into a tactical masterpiece, a demonstration of ingenuity and bravery that would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. Finally, the last wave of insurgents attempted to flee the valley, broken and demoralized. Rockets exploded behind them, fire shredded their ranks, and the once confident enemy collapsed under the onslaught. Silence began to settle over the battlefield, broken only by the crackling of fire and the groans of the wounded. The valley, once alive with chaos, now lay in a tense, smoke-filled stillness. The SEALs, battered, bloodied but alive, emerged from cover. They looked up at the wrecked Black Hawk, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Sarah, exhausted beyond measure, lowered her weapon slightly, surveying the aftermath of the battle. Every insurgent neutralized, every life saved was a testament to her courage, her ingenuity, and her unyielding determination. Hawk, leaning heavily against a rock, gave a faint nod of approval before succumbing to his injuries. His final words, whispered with effort, were a command and a blessing. "Lead them, Sarah, save them all." The responsibility now fully rested on her shoulders. Sarah allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to absorb the reality of what she had accomplished. She was bloodied, broken, and exhausted, but she had turned impossible odds into survival. Her improvisation, bravery, and relentless determination had transformed a hopeless mission into a victory, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for courage under fire. As dawn approached, the valley was quiet. The insurgents had been routed, the surviving SEALs regrouped, and the immediate danger had passed. Yet Sarah knew the fight was far from over. The scars of battle, both physical and mental, would linger, and the threat of future attacks remained. But for this moment, in the smoky, blood-soaked valley, Lieutenant Sarah had proven that even the most impossible situations could be overcome. She had turned destruction into strategy, despair into hope, and chaos into a lifeline for those who depended on her. Her eyes, bloodied but determined, scanned the valley one last time. The SEALs were alive, the enemy defeated, and survival had been achieved against impossible odds. Lieutenant Sarah, once a pilot in a wrecked helicopter, had become something more, a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and unwavering determination. The valley was silent now, save for the distant crackle of fires and the low groans of the wounded. The SEALs moved to tend to their injured, their eyes occasionally glancing up at the figure of Sarah in the Black Hawk, a lone, bloodied guardian who had descended from the sky to save them. And in that quiet, smoke-filled valley, a legend was born. Lieutenant Sarah, bloodied, broken, but unbowed, had become the Angel of Fire, a force that would be remembered long after the echoes of battle faded into history. The first rays of dawn crept over the mountains, casting a pale golden light on the valley that had been a battlefield just hours before. Smoke still rose in thin wisps from scorched earth and destroyed enemy positions. The air was thick with dust, gunpowder, and the lingering scent of blood, but amid the devastation, a fragile calm had settled. Lieutenant Sarah, bloodied, bruised, and utterly exhausted, finally allowed herself to sit back against the wrecked Black Hawk. Her uniform was torn, her hands raw and cut, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Every inch of her body screamed for rest, yet her mind refused to relent, scanning the valley to ensure that no immediate threat remained. The SEALs, bruised and weary, moved cautiously through the aftermath. They tended to the wounded, checked their ammunition, and regrouped under the quiet supervision of Sarah, who still held the firing controls, a grim reminder of the night's carnage. They had survived against impossible odds, and though they were alive, each of them carried the invisible weight of what they had endured: the lives lost, the blood spilled, the chaos endured. Hawk had not survived his injuries, and his absence hung over the group like a shadow. His courage and leadership had been a guiding force for the SEALs, and now that mantle fell fully on Sarah. Her heart ached for him, for the life lost, for the brother-in-arms who had trusted her with command in his final moments. Yet she knew that mourning could not compromise survival. The enemy had been repelled for now, but vigilance was still required. "Everyone accounted for," Sarah called out, her voice hoarse but commanding. One by one, the SEALs nodded, their eyes betraying exhaustion and awe in equal measure. They had witnessed something extraordinary: a downed pilot, injured and bloodied, turning a destroyed helicopter into a lethal weapon and saving their lives in the process. "Sarah," one of the SEALs began, struggling to find words. I can't, we wouldn't have made it without you." She shook her head, trying to suppress the tremor in her voice. "You all held the line. You survived because you fought. I just gave you a fighting chance. That's all any of us can do." Her words were modest, but the men understood the truth. She had done more than give them a chance. She had changed the course of the battle entirely, turning hopeless odds into a miraculous survival. Medical support arrived shortly after, helicopters touching down carefully amid the rocky terrain. The wounded were evacuated, and the survivors gathered to recount the events of the night. Sarah allowed herself to be helped down from the wreckage of the Black Hawk, every step painful, every movement a reminder of the cost she had paid. Yet the gratitude and awe in the eyes of the SEALs lifted her spirits. She was not just a survivor, she had become their savior, their guardian angel in the chaos of war. As the day progressed, reports of the battle reached higher command. The story of a downed pilot taking control of a destroyed helicopter to protect a SEAL team spread quickly. Medal recommendations were drafted, commendations issued, and every officer who heard of her actions was astounded by the sheer bravery, ingenuity, and resolve displayed under impossible conditions. Sarah's actions became the subject of briefings, training exercises, and eventually, a legend whispered among Special Forces units around the world. Yet for Sarah, the accolades were secondary. Her thoughts lingered on the men she had saved on Hawk, on the sacrifices made in the smoke-filled valley. She had faced death in its most intimate form, stared into chaos and emerged victorious, but the memories of the screams, the blood, and the devastation would remain with her forever. Survival had come at a cost, and though she had lived, she carried the weight of the battlefield in her heart. In the quiet moments after the evacuation, Sarah stood alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. The sun illuminated the scars of battle, burnt earth, shattered rock, and the remnants of enemy positions. She breathed deeply, feeling the crisp mountain air fill her lungs. She had done the impossible, but the valley bore the evidence of human cost, the price of courage, ingenuity, and unyielding will. Her mind wandered to Hawk, to the fallen, to the SEALs who had fought beside her. Their faces, etched with determination, pain, and bravery, would never leave her. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of grief and reflection, understanding that heroism often came intertwined with loss. The victory was hers, but it was a victory tempered by the reality of war. Months later, back in the United States, Sarah was awarded the Medal of Honor in a solemn ceremony. She stood tall, uniform pristine for the first time in weeks, medals gleaming against her chest. The president praised her courage, ingenuity, and the unyielding determination that had saved lives in the most impossible circumstances. The SEALs she had saved stood nearby, their eyes filled with respect and gratitude. Hawk's absence was felt keenly, and Sarah touched the small memorial pinned to her uniform in his honor. Yet even amid accolades, Sarah remained grounded. She returned to flight duty, to missions, and to service, but the legend of the Angel of Fire followed her wherever she went. Her story inspired countless others in the military, a reminder that courage, ingenuity, and determination could turn even the bleakest circumstances into triumph. She became a symbol, not of invincibility, but of the human spirit's capacity to survive, to fight, and to protect others against impossible odds. In quiet moments, Sarah often revisited the valley in her mind. She remembered the smoke, the fire, the screams, and the faces of those she had saved. The battle had changed her, left scars both visible and invisible, but it had also affirmed something essential: that courage and determination, even in the face of insurmountable odds, could alter the course of history. She visited the surviving SEALs frequently, helping them recover, honoring Hawk, and ensuring that the sacrifices of that night were never forgotten. Each reunion was bittersweet, filled with gratitude and the unspoken understanding of what they had endured together. The bond forged in fire, blood, and smoke was unbreakable, a testament to shared courage and survival. Ultimately, Lieutenant Sarah's story became legend, a tale recounted in military academies, in training sessions, and in whispered conversations among those who understood the price of courage. She was the pilot who had turned a wrecked helicopter into a weapon of salvation, the angel of fire who had stared into chaos and emerged victorious, and the living embodiment of bravery under fire. And though she bore the scars, both seen and unseen, she carried them with quiet pride. For in the valley, amid smoke, blood, and destruction, she had learned the true measure of heroism, not in survival alone, but in the courage to act, to protect, and to fight when all hope seemed lost. The sun set over the mountains once more, casting golden light across the valley. The scars of battle remained, but so did the memory of courage, a story of blood, bravery, and unwavering determination that would live on forever. Lieutenant Sarah, bloodied, broken, but unbowed, had proven that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit could prevail. And in that triumph, amidst the echoes of a battle hard fought and lives saved, the Angel of Fire earned her place in history, not just as a hero, but as a legend whose courage would inspire generations to come.